And good afternoon and welcome. This is Steve Fryer.
And Kathleen Jacoby.
And you're in the Millennium Cafe. And our guest today is Shabari Bird. And she is the widow of Christopher Bird, who is the author of Secrets of the Soil and another older book that many of you will probably remember, The Secret Life of Plants. And Christopher Bird co-authored these books with Peter Tompkins. Shabari, are you there?
I am indeed. And I also mentioned that Chris authored a book which is a perennial bestseller, which is called The Divining Hand, the 500-year mystery of dowsing.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's a wonderful book.
Well, I want to welcome you to the Millennium Cafe today. We're real excited to have you here.
Great.
I guess we could start with the Secrets of the Soil, since that's been reissued lately. And when was it first published, The Secrets of the Soil?
Secrets of the Soil was published in 1989. Harper Collins published it, the same publishers of Secret Life of Plants. And it's been republished by Earth Pulse Press in Alaska.
Well, these are, in my estimation, two groundbreaking books about another dimension. What we're really talking about here, I think, is our relationship with nature and how most of society these days, I don't know how long it's been, but perhaps in the last 40 or 50 years at least, has sort of progressively seemed to lose its connection with nature, and these books seem to want to restore that connection, and that's why it's called The Secrets or Secrets of the Soil or Secret Life of Plants. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I think that actually people are looking for a reconnection point, and I see it a lot in my workshops with people from the cities, and they become very enamored of Native American or gardening, and I think it's really our looking into our own ancestral roots of most of us, if we look back even 4 or 5 generations, have some peasant ancestor that sat by a hearth fire and tilled the soil and was very connected with the plants, so we have a genetic memory of that. And what these books address is a genetic memory, but also possibilities about plants and soils that weren't previously considered.
Now, how did you first become involved with this material? I know you were married to Christopher Bird for, about 8 or 9 years or something like that?
Yes, but in 1972, I was a stockbroker in Wall Street and one of the few women stockbrokers at the time, and sort of burning the candle at both ends, living quite the high life, and I was diagnosed with terminal Hodgkin's disease.
Wow.
And at that time, there was one health food store in all of New York City, and a friend of mine told me about a regime that could possibly help me, since it seemed to have been completely inoperable, and chemotherapy was very new at that time and quite terrifying to me. So she took me to buy my first juicer, and I started on a regime of carrot juice and vitamin therapy, pretty much unknown at that time. And as a result, moved into the country of North Georgia, where I currently live, and went on this regime of living close to nature. And it was quite a move from Manhattan to here in the Appalachians. And that's how I began. In 1974, a friend gave me a book called Secret Life of Plants. And when you eat and drink a lot of plants, as I was at the time, you somehow become into the resonance. And I was very interested in gardening and starting my first garden. And Secret Life of Plants, it just totally turned me into a different thinker. I mean, I had never considered many of the concepts given. And as a result, I took up the study of homeopathy, which was introduced to the mass public at that time through Secret Life of Plants, herbal medicine, and also gardening. So, and then later, I sponsored a great deal of workshops here at our place and met Chris, and it was sort of the proverbial love at first sight, and so that's how that began.
And how did Christopher get involved with this?
Chris was actually had a degree in biology and botany from Harvard, and so he'd always had an interest in it. His father had always had a large farm. They are an old Boston family that in fact, the oldest ongoing manufacturing firm in the United States, Bird and Son. But they'd always had a large farm, and so he was put into that life by his father very early, and they were great naturalists, and in fact they donated a great deal of land on Chappaquiddick Island as a nature conservancy.
Mm-hmm.
So this had been in his family, and when he was, somewhere along the line when he left the CIA and Jimmy Rand, he met Peter Tompkins, and Peter had suggested that Chris at that time was a correspondent for Time magazine in Yugoslavia, and he spoke Serbo-Croatian. And when he came back from that post, Peter said, "Why don't we do a book together on Wilhelm Reich?"
Uh-huh.
And so Chris spent numerous years researching Wilhelm Reich, and through Reich's work, started thinking a different concept from most Harvard graduates on energy fields. And at the same time, he and Peter met Marcel Vogel and Cleve Baxter,
Mm-hmm.
and it was suggested that they write a book on plants, and anomalous natures of plants. So the Wilhelm Reich manuals still sit ready to be published, and
Oh, really?
the rest is history for Secret Life of Plants.
Did any of this work have to do with his work in the CIA, or was this all post-CIA?
Oh, this is definitely post-CIA.
Okay. So,
Although the first chapter, which I think was an excellent first chapter, was quite intriguing to most people, showing Cleve Baxter's research with the polygraph, the lie detector,
right.
on plants, and that sort of grabbed the people's imagination.
Yes, it did.
And it presented a sort of quasi-scientific proof of a tenet that most of us would have never considered, that plants actually have a sense of feeling and even a memory.
Yes. In fact, when the Damanhur, we did a show with a representative from Damanhur in Italy, a community, and they have devised a machine that not only interacts with plants, but allows the plants to sing, to play a melody, their own melody. It is in control of the machine itself, and apparently Stephen Halpern did a concert with the plants.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So this is all just going at such a rate, it's fascinating. And to think that this book, which was such a groundbreaker in the early 70s, I mean, I don't know anybody of our generation who didn't read it at that point. It was the hot topic.
Well, actually, it's still in print in 15 languages,
Mm-hmm.
and there has been a resurgence of readership among college students now.
Yep.
That's great.
I have 3 children in college, and there's definitely interest in these topics again.
Yes, and there's also such a movement towards vegetarianism amongst that age group.
Well, they are all vegetarian.
Yeah.
My children.
Well, I mean in general, which is it's quite unusual. I mean, this is quite something, that there's just a consciousness that is unfolding amidst this great technological advance that we're doing, and the this misuse of all of these petroleum kinds of pesticides, everything else on the soil. So it's fascinating how on one hand we have this awakening again, and then on the other hand this misuse of petroleum products to find an outlet for them and using it within our soil. I'd really like you to talk a little about that.
Well, it's really interesting because I recently spoke to a farmer in Colorado that has turned his 9,500 acres to purely organic growing,
Mm-hmm.
mostly of potatoes, oddly enough. And of course the question is why, and it's purely financial.
Mm-hmm.
Shabari, we have to go to a break here. You're in the Millennium Cafe, and we have Shabari Bird, who is the widow of Christopher Bird, and we're talking about the secrets of the soil and the secret life of plants. This is Steve Fryer along with Kathleen Jacoby, and we'll be right back right after this. Stay with us. And we are back in the Millennium Cafe. I'm Steve Fryer, along with my co-host Kathleen Jacoby, and we're talking about the secret life of plants and the secrets of the soil with Shabari Bird. And during the break, you mentioned Cleve Baxter, and a lot of people are probably aware of Cleve Baxter, but for those who aren't, why don't you give us a little background about Cleve Baxter and what he was able to do in his experiments?
Well, in Secret Life of Plants, the first chapter that intrigued people was about a scientist named Cleve Baxter, who was considered, and still is, the world specialist on the use of the polygraph. And one day he was in his office. He still does train lots of military and police people in polygraph work. And he was kind of bored, so he said, I wonder what would happen if I attached a polygraph to a plant. And he did. He put the little diode down there and just suddenly thought, well, how am I going to get a response from this plant? And he says, well, what if I burn it? And suddenly the plant just started, the little polygraph started going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Just from his thought.
And then he realized that often, well, how could this plant be sensing? It has no brain and has no nervous system. What's going on? He said, well, sometimes just my energy could affect it. So he said, what I really need to do is truly threaten the plant. And he actually lit a match, and the plant just went, in a way, screamed. And so that began a very long process of research. And still ongoing, actually. I talked to him a couple of weeks ago. He's in San Diego, and his research has deepened. They've done a great deal of research with long-distance reception by plants. I mean, thousands of miles away, people will think various thoughts about plants. Plants themselves act as a lie detector. They did a very excellent study with the destruction of a plant, and 6 people came back into the room individually, and the plant detected immediately who was the person that had destroyed it. So what this did is it opens in our consciousness a thinking about plants not just being just there without any response.
Just objects,
Yeah, just objects. And through this, the research has deepened. Okay, what kind of music affects plants? What kind of thinking affects plants? As my beloved husband said, the thing the plants love the most is the footsteps of the gardener.
And what about the mineralization and the care of the soil the plants grow in?
Well, soil, just like a plant, is a living organism.
I think a lot of people don't know that. They don't think about that.
Well, you can very easily tell. One of my teachers was this lovely old man who was sort of the Johnny Appleseed of biodynamics, and he taught me something very early on. This was in 1974. He said, it is not dirt, it is soil. Soil is alive and dirt is dead.
Which brings up the fact that the whole earth is conscious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in the soil, a living soil, there are literally millions of tons of microorganisms which are alive. They're alive, breathing, dying, reproducing themselves. But the magical thing about these microorganisms is the key that they play for life is that they literally transmute what we would consider, quote, dead minerals into living beingness. They are able to take rock dust or just stones and break down. They are what is responsible for the breaking down of stones into life force.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, a study in Secrets of the Soil, they talk about how they finally figured out in Peru how the pyramids were built, and it was using lichens. Lichens literally break down the stone, and it etched the stones that caused the blocks for building these huge pyramids.
No kidding.
And these little, what we would consider nothing beings, these lichens, have this powerful force that they can take stones and break them down. And so what in our soils happens is that these microorganisms uptake from the stones the minerals, transmute them, and then the earthworms come, eat the microorganisms, dissolve them, and they build this luscious, fertile soil. And that's the difference between fertility and a desert.
So true. The earthworms are just amazing what they are able to do.
I have a question about the work of Cleve Baxter again. Has he had any done any experiments where they've taken plants that were, say, really grown in very healthy soil versus plants that were grown in unhealthy soil, and done any experiments on the differences and how they respond?
I couldn't tell you that categorically. Of course, lots of people have done that as far. In fact, Consumer Report last year did an excellent survey of the difference between organic vegetables and non-organic vegetables. And, of course, organic vegetables tend to have healthier soils because the soils haven't been stripped.
Mm-hmm.
And they have more microorganisms in them. And there's, without a doubt, proof that organic fertile soils yield healthier plants that are more pest resistant.
That's right. That's the key.
Just like good food makes healthier people that are more resistant to diseases.
So how do you think we as a society got off on this sort of a tangent of using such a heavy doses of pesticides
And petroleum
and
products.
petroleum-based pesticides, and
Well,
then
like most things, it was pretty financially based. During World War I in Europe, the Germans discovered that they could take ammonia directly from the atmosphere, that they could create ammonia from the nitrogen in the atmosphere, and they used this ammonia to make weapons.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the gases that were used for military weapons were developed during that time. So when the war ended, they had these massive factories with these huge amounts of liquid ammonia, which had literally been extracted from the air. And they didn't know what to do with it. And it just came up with some chemical analysis that, plants need lots of nitrogen.
Oh, boy.
Let's just sell this nitrogen off. And it really began what is now the chemicalization of all of our soils and all of our foods.
sort of a byproduct of...
It was a byproduct, of course, of the military
Yeah.
complex. And it's continued since then. And now, poor farmers in this country, they're stuck.
Yes.
Because they've been now into the third generation or fourth generation of putting more and more of these, ammonia-based fertilizers on their soil, which depletes deeper and deeper the levels of microorganisms. And that's how a dust bowl is created. And we're right now on the edge of another huge dust bowl in this country, which could wipe this economy out very quickly.
It is interesting, however, that there are more. I know we in California have lots of farms that are turning to organic farming practices. We have, in this area, for instance, farmers markets that come and sell their vegetables, and many, many more of those are now organic farms. So, and I think someone we talked with had mentioned that there's quite a good economic base for that it's actually very viable for farmers to move into organic farming.
Well, in the recent time, I've been speaking to a lot of very large-scale farmers. In fact, in Secrets of the Soil, there's a whole chapter on a man in North Dakota named Kirshenman, which is a fantastic chapter. This man courageously, 20 years ago, started turning an old, failing family farm into organic growing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hugely courageous because, first of all, it had never been done, and secondly, it was, that was bottom lining it. And what he found was, what saved him was the fact that he found that European buyers would pay a premium, sometimes 30% to 40% more for his biodynamically grown, not just organically, but biodynamically grown grains.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how he's been able, and he's still very much in business, still very much growing. And this past few weeks I've talked to some very large-scale farmers, and they're all finding it more viable financially. You just have to get through that first 2 or 3 years
Right.
in the switchover because you have to build the humus in their soils. And it is a labor-intensive practice because of the weed control.
Mm-hmm.
Right, our friend Penny Kelly in Michigan, they bought a farm and they found out they had grapes on the farm.
Oh,
And a
wonderful.
lot of grapes around California as well, here in Sonoma Valley. And their advice was to build up the soil as well. And as they've done that, they've increased their grape harvest by going organic by 3 or 4 times. We've got to go to a break here, Shabari. Shabari, I'm sorry. And you're in the Millennium Cafe. Stay with us. We're talking about the secret life of plants and the secrets of the soil. And we're back. You're in the Millennium Cafe. I'm Steve Fryer. And we're speaking with Shabari Bird. And she is the title holder, I guess, of the book, The Secrets of the Soil and the Secret Life of Plants. And before the break, we were just started to get into a discussion about grape farming, and you had something you wanted to add to that.
Well, it's very interesting how Secret Life of Plants changed a lot of people's lives. And there was a man that Chris came across named Dan Carlson. And when he was in Korea as a military person, he noticed mothers purposely maiming their children in order to beg for food. And he made a clear decision that he was going to end world hunger. Well, that's a nice decision, but he actually started really working on it. And as a result, he read Secret Life of Plants, and he discovered, well, sound current affects growth cycles of plants. Then he went even deeper and did a lot of research at universities and found out a specific frequency that actually causes the plants all have on their leaves little openings that are called stomata or stomata. And that certain sound currents actually causes these stomata to open wider than they normally would. Oddly enough, the sound current or the frequency of sound is very similar to songbirds in the morning time.
Mm-hmm.
And so nature resonates this. And this is very important for people that live in desert environments because when the stomatas open up, it allows the plant to uptake more moisture from the atmosphere. Well, using this, he then created a foliar feed, which, when the stomatas are open, you foliar feed these plants. And it's just a very simple little program.
Like a liquid spray?
Yeah, it's like a liquid spray.
Of nutrients.
Nutrients,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all organic. But what is noticed, and at least we've noticed here, and I've heard it from people, everyone from orchid growers, grape growers, tomato growers, anything where you want multiple blossoms or multiple fruit,
Mm-hmm.
is that the use of this, actually, it's amazing,
Right.
the amount of fruit that sets when I use this, it's called Sonic Bloom.
Right.
Oddly enough.
Exactly.
And Chris used to joke around and call it, also it could be used, calling it sonic doom, meaning when you use the sound current, if you have to use a herbicide, for instance, that you can use up to 1/10 of the amount.
Much smaller, right.
Much smaller amounts because the stomata being open causes much larger amounts of uptake of whatever is being applied to the leaves.
Well, I'm pretty sure our friends at Lily Hill Farm on their grape farm are using this technology of the sonic bloom and the biodynamic principles as well. So that may help account for why their yield has grown 3 to 4 times over the last few years.
Oh, it's tremendous what you can do with grape growing. There's a lot of grape growers in California. In fact, I know a man that's the consultant named Jack Larson who consults with the grape farmers in Sonoma and how to set up biodynamic growing. And he's been able to reduce the amount of chemicals and just the expense of producing grapes by about 50 to 60%. This becomes very crucial, as you can imagine.
Yes.
In all of this, you're telling me the one thing that resonates here is when you say the songbirds,
Mm-hmm.
their morning song allows the plants to become receptive. It opens them up. And I just think about how we have created through our biblical misunderstanding this horrible earth that we must overcome, when indeed this is such a blessing. When you look at what truly is going on with this marvelous, this intricacy of nature, it's awesome.
The loss of songbirds in this country is so massive that it's frightening.
Oh, dear.
My neighbor is a beekeeper, and as you know, in California, without bees and songbirds, nothing lives.
Yes.
Just like without earthworms, soil is never fertile. And literally, people in California, I asked when I was out there recently, what do you do about the bees? Because they spray so much.
Yeah.
And literally, they give a warning the week before when they're going to spray, and then the beekeepers have to come and literally transport hundreds and thousands of bee boxes out of the area so that their bees aren't killed.
Well, it's like the misunderstanding that people have about trees. We happen to live on top of a hill, and there are people who cut their trees down because they obscure the view. Mm-hmm. And I had a huge pine tree just recently trimmed, and one of the neighbors was saying how the tree was messy. And I said, don't you understand the trees are the nervous receptors of the earth? We are losing so much touch in all of this. We don't understand how this truly affects this living, breathing organism that we call Earth, our mother. So what you're doing, and these books are very timely, very important. You mentioned during the break Rudolf Steiner.
Right. And we couldn't let you get by without having a little discussion of Steiner.
Yeah, we have to have that.
Tell us who is Rudolf
How
Steiner?
can anybody talk about it without Steiner? If we
Without
couldn't
Steiner, I'm researching a book on water now, and the opening chapter is going to deal with Steiner, because Dr. Steiner he really brought forward in very short and difficult-to-read essays a shift for agriculture, for geometry, for art, for education, and in this case, in Schwenk's work, for water. And Dr. Steiner was brilliant, and biodynamic agriculture came out of very short essays that he wrote very close to the end of his life on agriculture, and it is now widespread. In fact, in Secrets of the Soil, there's several chapters on biodynamics, and Alex Podolinsky in Australia has literally put in 5 million acres, and it might be 30 million by now for all I know, in biodynamic agriculture. And you can take a desert soil. Chris told me about being in Australia with Podolinsky, putting a pitchfork. One side had been biodynamically treated just spreading of microorganisms based on biodynamic starters, just spreading it on the soil, not composting, not fertilizing, anything, just spreading them once a year. One side, white loam all the way down. The other side, where the biodynamic preps were, solid, black, fertile soil.
Wow.
It works that
3
quickly.
years.
That's amazing.
It is amazing, and it's so simple, but it's reminding us that we are built on all these teeny little, so infinitesimally small that we take as irrelevant. But all of life springs forth from this.
From the smallest.
From the smallest.
Yes, yes. And for those of our listeners who are not aware of Rudolf Steiner, he is the head, or was the former of the anthroposophical movement. And so there are a great number of books that he's written, and he is also responsible for the Waldorf educational system that comes out of his work.
Yeah, I heard he wrote over 500 books, actually.
Yes, well, he was brilliant in using Goethean science. And in fact, the Rudolf Steiner College out your way is an extraordinary place to visit and to study at.
Where is that? Do you know?
Oh gosh, don't ask me right this second.
Okay.
I get fuddled.
Somewhere
It's
out in
not very
California.
far from you.
Okay.
I know. And but the Waldorf school. Now that's very interesting because in the Waldorf schools, one of the things in order to be a Waldorf school is you must have a garden.
Mm-hmm.
So right from nursery school and kindergarten, children are taught a relationship with plants and with nature.
Yes, and also with movement, isn't it? With the arrhythmy, with
Yes,
the dance.
with the eurythmy.
Yeah, absolutely part of the art of life. One of the things that we have lost, the art of living, which is intricately linked to our soil. The soil of our soul, the soil of our earth, all of it, all together. And we remove ourselves, and yet here we see in the younger generation this incredible hunger for something more, and they're asking, and they're thinking, and they're conscious. So technologically we're advancing, but also there is a movement looking for how do we reconnect.
Well, the thing is that I teach a lot of children, and they come here, and also teenagers, and it's amazing that they have no idea where their food source is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I tell all these teenagers that come here that their best bet, because they all have friends that they visit, is to walk around with $2 or $3 worth of any kind of bulb. So when they visit their friends, plant 2 or 3 little lily bulbs or tulip bulbs or anything. And I said, in 10 years, you're going to come back, and there's going to be a patch of tulips there. And in 20 years, you can come back with your children or even your grandchildren and say, oh, my God, I planted those. And you would have made a difference. Something so simple.
We have to go to a break here, Shabari. We're with Shabari Bird, and we're talking about the secrets of the soil and the secret life of plants. I'm Steve Fryer, and you're in the Millennium Cafe. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back. You're in the Millennium Cafe, and I'm Steve Fryer, along with my co-host,
Kathleen Jacoby.
And we have Shabari Bird in the cafe today. And in this final segment, Shabari, I'd like to have you talk about community-supported agriculture and what can people do in maybe even large cities like San Francisco to get a greater handle on their...
To maximize this living process that we're part of so that we can be healthy and conscious.
I have a neighbor that has started, it's called a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, based on biodynamics. Of course, there are CSAs that aren't. And basically, all of his members live in Atlanta. And so what they do is they have about 100 members, and they get together and pay an annual fee. Now, there are many different formulas. Some people get together and pay $1,000 a year, and they literally own the farm and pay the farmer. Some people just pay a minimal fee to pay for his seed and planting, and then he sells a per pound cost of vegetables and delivers it to 4 different places in the city. This is very viable for most people, and I think it's much more popular than people realize.
Oh, so the members don't have to actually be involved in the garden itself if they don't want to?
It depends
They just pay the gardener.
the specific formula of the specific organization.
Okay.
I think it's real important for people to get involved. Like in the Northeast, I know people that take their entire families, and they go and they spend the weekend there. What I see, though, is a vision that I saw in Europe, which fascinates me. In Holland, particularly, is people would get on a train and go out 30 minutes, an hour from the city and have little eighth of an acre garden plots.
Oh, isn't that something?
With hundreds of little garden plots. And sometimes they'd have a little shack or something on there, and they'd literally spend the weekend. And they could produce on those plots all of their vegetable needs for the summer.
Wow.
And I think anyone with any foresight financially could do this and just have their own little garden shop there and have little things about this can only be organic, supply them earthworms and whatever was needed. And particularly if you're near some kind of feedlot or something where you get lots of manure available, and start composting. And it's a very viable thing. Plus, people, you can garden literally in plastic milk containers. When I was at the Earth Summit in Rio, one of the things I saw that they brought forward was in Mexico, literally people in their crowded apartments taking and putting tomato plants upside down from milk containers. And your plant grows out. You just cut the bottom off. It grows out the spout and produces massive amounts of tomatoes. But you can do potatoes. You can do all kinds of vegetables right in your apartment. And then again, sprouting is a kind of gardening.
Yes.
And people are very conscious of Y2K right now. And I think that sprouting of lentils, all kinds of vegetables, you can just eat the sprouts. And you literally get in touch with the whole growing mechanism. By the way, sonic bloom works particularly well when you're doing these kinds of indoor gardening projects.
Really?
And where do you find Sonic Bloom?
Actually, you can through our publisher, Earth Pulse Press. He distributes Sonic Bloom. And, it's a pretty amazing product. Then if you get a few of the biodynamic, which is on our webpage, by the way, biodynamic organisms, their phone number is there, and put those in your soil, and then you can get yourself, just take your vegetable garbage and your coffee grinds and set up a little trash can. So many people have told me in the last few weeks that they have created their own earthworm beds.
Yeah, we do that.
And that they are so happy because these earthworms, just without a rototiller or a plow or anything, you can take deadpan soil in 3 years and turn it into friable living earth.
Yes.
Just because of earthworms.
Yeah.
They're wonderful.
They are amazing, and we the mineralized glacialized rock is just really something that I think people just don't have enough knowledge about, and it's an amazing. I just can't tell you how it's changed our red soil into this black, and we've only been here for about 9 months.
Oh, that's excellent.
And worms everywhere, just everywhere. And I think the only thing we added to that was a blood meal, something like that.
Yeah, they love blood meal. And the other thing is, very interestingly, most people don't think of it because it's an animal feed, is cottonseed meal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you put cottonseed meal, and the earthworms love it. So that when I came back to this farm with Chris, it had not been used in so long, so I went and spread cottonseed meal everywhere, just literally to feed the earthworms.
So if we're talking, you've talked about the apartment dwellers and what they can do, and cooperative farms, or just getting together in some way, which is a fabulous idea. Now, what about people who have houses and have a backyard and have a little garden? I know that we're looking at the Y2K situation, and people are being told to gather food. And what about growing food? And if so, what kinds of plants or food crops are the best for the soil, are the best as far as going from the transition into this natural organic state? Is there anything you know of?
Well, I have to, before I say too much more, because I'll forget, is that we have a research center here, and some of the research that's been coming out of Russia is very fascinating. And after Chernobyl, the soils were greatly, as you can imagine, hugely toxic. In fact, so toxic that they never expected them not to be radioactive. And they have been growing mustard all over the soils around Chernobyl, and now the soils are neutral from radioactivity.
Oh, that's something.
So it is something. I think when you have these small, shady plot, which is what most apartment dwellers will have,
Right.
is what's really, lots of things love shade. Lettuces, spinach, they actually prefer shady, cool, and then people can have their own salad gardens. And if you have one sunny spot, or even inside, there's nothing like a tomato bush to thrill the whole family. Because then you have something that you can pick and you can see, and it keeps on going. To build a soil, it's not really that difficult, because every little garden supply house, I think it's more the kind of pleasure one receives just from tending the soil and seeing something, life spring forth.
Well, it nurtures the soul.
It does nurture the soil.
The secret of soil is the secret of the soul.
Oh, you got it. You're great. It is so true. And I think that this children learning right from little Dixie cups of planting a seed, and the joy of seeing that seed sprout, and seeing that life can spring forth from something so simple,
Yes.
And as all we did was nourish it, and
Yes.
that's sort of where the attention goes, the energy flows.
Right.
Right on.
And when we give our attention, our loving attention, and our acknowledgement, my dear friend Sunbear used to say, when you wake up in the morning, say, "Thank you, Great Spirit." And that's an acknowledgement that expands life. We acknowledge this beauty. Thank you. So every time we say thank you, this gratitude causes life to spring forth.
And it expands us.
And it expands us, and it expands God.
Yes.
Because it's nothing but expanding love.
Well, on that high note, I think we should give out your website address and anything else you want to give out.
Yeah, and
Go
phone
ahead.
numbers, whatever we can, so that people can
terrific.
connect with
So
you.
We have a great new website, and it's called ChristopherBird.com, and I'm real thrilled. And there, all of our coordinates, all of our phone numbers, our email, photos, and all that. And the distributor and publisher of Secrets of the Soil is Earth Pulse Press, and their phone number is 907-694-1277. And, of course, on our webpage, you can order the books, too.
And we're talking about The Secret Life of Plants and the Secrets of the Soil, in case you just tuned in late.
And the Divine
Hand, yes.
Yes, which is about dowsing, which is a whole nother show.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you, Shabari Bird, for
thank you.
taking
Thank
the
you
time
so
out of your
much.
gardening schedule.
I'd like to hear
being
how
with
your
us.
garden's doing later on in the year.
Okay,
we
we'll
will.
let you know.
Okay. Take care.
All right. It's been a real pleasure having you in the
Fun for
Millennium
me.
Cafe today.